You think you belong in my seat? Security! Remove this, go immediately!
The words cut through the first-class cabin like a blade, sharp, deliberate, loud enough for every passenger to hear. Richard Hartwell stood in the aisle of Pinnacle Airways Flight 847, his face red with indignation. His navy pinstripe suit screamed money. His platinum Patek Philippe watch caught the cabin light. His voice carried the authority of someone who had never been told no. Behind him, Victoria Martinez clutched a boarding pass in her manicured hands. Her flight attendant uniform was crisp professional, but her expression was anything but neutral. She stared down at the young woman in seat 1A with barely concealed disdain. Maya Brooks didn't move. She sat quietly in the premium leather seat, her worn Harvard hoodie a stark contrast to the polished luxury around her. Her legs were tucked under her earbuds, dangling from her neck, dark eyes steady and calm. She had seen this before. Miss Victoria's voice was syrupy sweet, but underneath was steel. "I need to see your boarding pass. There seems to be a discrepancy." Maya reached into her hoodie pocket. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out the crumpled boarding pass and handed it over without a word. Richard snatched it from Victoria's hands before she could examine it. He unfolded it like he was unwrapping evidence of a crime. "This is impossible," he barked. His voice boomed across the cabin. "I am a Diamond Elite member. I have sat in 1A on this route for 7 years. This seat is mine." From row 3, C. Maria Vasquez raised her iPhone. The social media influencer had been documenting her luxury travel experience when the confrontation erupted. Now she was capturing something else entirely. "This is happening right now on Pinnacle Airways," she whispered into her camera. "A black woman is being told she doesn't belong in first class." The cabin fell silent except for the hum of the engines. Passengers lowered their magazines. Conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward seat 1A. Maya looked up at Richard. Her voice was quiet, controlled. "I paid for this seat." With what money? Richard's laugh was sharp, cruel. "Let me guess, someone else's credit card." Victoria stepped closer. "Sir, perhaps we can resolve this quietly. Miss, if you could just move to another seat." "No." The word hung in the air. Simple. Final. Maya's phone buzzed. A text from her assistant, David Rivera, Falcon 900, still grounded. "ETA for parts unknown. Sorry, boss." She closed her eyes for a moment. In her mind, she could see her mother's face. 60 years old today, waiting in London for the birthday dinner they had planned for months. Maya had promised to be there. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Richard. "I'm not moving." What none of them knew was that in exactly 90 minutes, Maya would own every seat on this plane. In 6 hours, 3 people would be jobless and 1 would be arrested. And the woman in the worn hoodie would become the face of the most expensive lesson in respect that the aviation industry had ever received. But that was 90 minutes away. Right now, she was just a young black woman being told she didn't belong. The story begins 3 hours earlier at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. Maya had been sitting in the fixed-base operator lounge staring out at her grounded Falcon 900. The private jet sat on the tarmac like a monument to expensive inconvenience. Hydraulic sensor failure, her pilot had explained, wiping grease from his hands. "Parts are coming from Savannah. Could be 24 hours. 24 hours she didn't have." Maya was the founder and CEO of Aurora Global Industries, a shipping and logistics empire worth $43 billion. She was 28 years old. She was exhausted from 3 days of negotiations with Google and Amazon executives about automated shipping lanes, and she was supposed to be in London in 8 hours for her mother's 60th birthday. "Check a commercial," she had told David, who was already typing furiously on his tablet. "JFK to Heathrow," David muttered. Pinnacle Airways. 1 first-class seat available. Flight 847, book it. "Should I tell them who you are?" "They have a VIP service." That number. Maya grabbed her beaten-up Hermes backpack. To most people, it looked like a thrift store find. It was worth more than a luxury car. "I just want to sleep. No fanfare, no captain visits, just quiet." The drive to JFK had been a blur of rain and traffic. Maya hadn't flown commercial in 4 years. She had forgotten the chaos, the noise, the stress radiating from every corner. At check-in, Rosa Gutierrez had looked at Maya's passport, then at her hoodie, then back at the passport. A micro-pause, a moment of assessment. First class to London, Rosa's voice carried a note of skepticism. Yes. Ticket was purchased 20 minutes ago. Last-minute change of plans. Rosa had printed the boarding pass without making eye contact. No smile, no welcome. Just the bare minimum of service. At the gate, Michael Torres had scanned Maya's boarding pass with the same skeptical expression. The machine beeped green, confirming Seat 1A, but his voice dropped an octave. "Enjoy your flight," he had said, but it sounded like a question. Now, Maya sat in that seat, surrounded by the polished comfort of Pinnacle's Sky Suite cabin. The seats were arranged in a 1-to-1 configuration. Privacy pods with sliding doors, massive screens, leather that cost more per square foot than most people's rent. She had kicked off her worn Adidas slides, pulled her knees to her chest, and closed her eyes. She just wanted peace. She wanted to arrive in London rested for her mother's celebration. Instead, she got Richard Hartwell. "I'm calling the captain," Richard announced, pulling out his phone. "This is unacceptable." Victoria nodded eagerly. "I'll get Captain Rodriguez." Maya opened her eyes. She looked at Richard for a long moment, studied his face, the entitlement, the certainty that he was right and she was wrong. She had seen that expression before. 5 years ago at a boutique hotel in Atlanta. She had been 23 fresh from closing her first major deal, tired from the red-eye flight, wearing sweats and carrying a backpack. The desk clerk had looked her up and down and said, "You don't look like someone who'd stay here." He had told her the system was down, that she should come back when the manager was around. She had slept in her rental car that night using her laptop charger in a gas station to finish the contract that would become the foundation of Aurora Global. The next morning, she had started planning the business empire that would ensure no one could ever make her sleep in a car again. Now, she was worth $43 billion, and she was being told she didn't belong in a seat she had paid for. Some things never changed. "There has clearly been a computer error," Victoria said, returning Maya's boarding pass like it was contaminated. "Mr. Hartwell is one of our most valued customers." Maya looked at the boarding pass. Seat 1A, her name printed clearly, paid for with her black Centurion card. "What kind of error?" she asked quietly. Richard stepped closer. His cologne was expensive and overwhelming, the kind where someone uses a stolen credit card to book seats they can't afford. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Around the cabin, passengers began to take notice. Phones came out. Not to make calls, to record. Dr. James Patterson in seat 2. B folded his Wall Street Journal and watched with growing concern. He was a white physician from Connecticut, heading to a medical conference in London. He had seen discrimination before in hospitals and country clubs and boardrooms. He recognized it now. In seat 4, Sofia Lopez opened the voice recorder on her phone. She was a civil rights lawyer, and she knew evidence when she saw it forming. Maria Vasquez kept her camera rolling, whispering commentary for her 100,000 followers. "This is insane. They're literally accusing her of credit card fraud for sitting in a seat she paid for." Maya reached into her hoodie again. This time, she pulled out her phone and sent a text to David, "Document everything. Start recording all calls." The response came back immediately. "Already on it. Legal team standing by." Victoria returned from the cockpit with Captain Rodriguez, a middle-aged Hispanic man with tired eyes and 20 years of airline experience. He looked at Maya, then at Richard, then at the growing crowd of passengers with their phones out. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already regretted getting involved. Richard launched into his explanation like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "This girl is in my seat. I am a Diamond Elite member. I have status. I have history with this airline. She clearly doesn't belong in first class." Captain Rodriguez looked at Maya's boarding pass. "Valid ticket, correct seat assignment, payment processed." "Ma'am, your ticket appears to be in order," he said carefully. Of course it's in order. Richard's voice rose another octave. She probably bought it with a stolen card. Have you seen how she's dressed? Does she look like someone who can afford a $5,000 seat? Maya stood up slowly. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall, but in that moment she seemed to tower over everyone around her. Her voice remained calm, quiet, steady. How exactly should I look? The question stopped Richard cold. His mouth opened, then closed. The racist implication of his words hung naked in the air between them. Around the cabin, phones kept recording. Live streams kept broadcasting. The hashtag Pinnacle Airways was starting to trend. Maya sat back down. I paid for this seat. I have a valid boarding pass. I'm not moving. That's when Victoria made the decision that would change everything. She reached for the phone in the galley and dialed airport security. "This is Victoria Martinez on Pinnacle Flight 847, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I need security at Gate B47 immediately. We have a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions." Maya pulled out her own phone and scrolled to David's number. When he answered, she spoke quietly, but clearly. David initiated Protocol 7. On the other end of the line, 3 miles away, in Aurora Global's Manhattan headquarters, David Rivera sat up straight in his chair. Protocol 7 was the emergency acquisition protocol, the nuclear option, the plan they had developed but never used. "Are you sure?" David asked. "Do it." Maya hung up and looked at Richard Hartwell. He was still talking, still gesticulating, still convinced he was in the right. He had no idea that he had just triggered the most expensive mistake of his life. Airport security arrived in the form of Officer Luis Morales, a 10-year veteran who had seen every kind of passenger dispute imaginable. He walked onto the plane expecting another routine removal. A drunk passenger, maybe. Someone who couldn't find their seat. The usual chaos of commercial aviation. Instead, he found a calm young woman sitting quietly in first class, surrounded by nearly 24 passengers with their phones out recording every word. "What's the situation?" Officer Morales asked Victoria. Before she could answer, Richard stepped forward like he was taking control of a boardroom meeting. "Officer, this person is refusing to leave a seat that doesn't belong to her. She's disrupting the flight. She's probably using stolen identification. I am a Diamond Elite member of this airline, and I need this resolved immediately." Officer Morales looked at Maya. She handed him her boarding pass, her driver's license, and her credit card without being asked. All legitimate. All matching. "Ma'am, these documents appear to be in order," he said. "Of course they're in order," Maya replied quietly. "I paid for this seat." Richard's face grew redder. "You can't be serious. Look at her. Does she look like she belongs in first class?" The racist implications of his words weren't lost on anyone. Dr. Patterson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sofia Lopez raised her phone higher to capture the audio clearly. Maria Vasquez whispered into her live stream, "This is getting worse by the minute." Maya looked at Richard with the same expression she used in hostile corporate takeovers. Calm, calculating, unmoved by bluster and intimidation. "What exactly should I look like?" she asked again. This time, Richard took the bait. Like someone who can actually afford to be here, like someone who belongs, not like... He gestured at her hoodie, her slides, her natural hair pulled back in a simple bun. Not like this. The cabin fell silent. Even Officer Morales looked uncomfortable. Maya Brooks had built Aurora Global Industries from nothing. She had started with a single shipping contract and turned it into a $43 billion empire. She had negotiated with heads of state, outmaneuvered Fortune 500 CEOs, and revolutionized global logistics. She had also been kicked out of restaurants for wearing jeans, followed in department stores by security guards who assumed she was shoplifting, asked to show additional identification when her white colleagues were waved through. She was used to being underestimated. It had become her secret weapon. "I see," Maya said softly. She pulled out her phone again and made another call. "David, add discrimination charges to the legal package. Make sure you get the audio from the passenger recordings." Richard laughed. "Who are you calling your dealer? Your parole officer?" The insult hung in the air like poison. Around the cabin, passengers began to react. Dr. Patterson stood up. "That's enough," he said firmly. "This is completely inappropriate." Richard whirled on him. "Mind your own business, this doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does, Sophia," Lopez said, standing up from her seat. "I'm a civil rights attorney, and I'm watching a clear case of racial discrimination unfold in real time." "Oh, great," Richard sneered. "Now, everyone's a lawyer. Look, people, this is simple. Some of us pay for our seats, some of us don't. Some of us belong here, some of us don't. And anyone with eyes can see which category this girl falls into." Victoria had been standing quietly through the exchange, but now she stepped forward. Her job depended on keeping elite passengers happy. Richard Hartwell flew this route twice a month. He spent hundreds of thousands of dollars annually with Pinnacle Airways. Maya Brooks was a stranger in a hoodie. The math seemed simple. "Ma'am," Victoria said to Maya, "in the interest of resolving this peacefully, perhaps you would consider moving to our premium economy cabin. I can offer you a complimentary upgrade for your next flight." Maya looked at her steadily. "Are you asking me to give up the seat I paid for? I'm offering a reasonable compromise." "There is no compromise," Maya said. Her voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "I paid for this seat. This is my seat. I'm not moving." Richard clapped his hands together. "Finally, someone who gets it. Officer, remove her." Officer Morales found himself in an impossible position. The black woman had valid documents and had done nothing wrong. The white man was being openly discriminatory but was clearly a high-value customer. The flight attendant was siding with the white man despite the evidence, and everyone was recording everything. "Ma'am," he said to Maya, "if you could just cooperate and move to another seat, we can avoid any further no." The word was quiet but absolute. Maya reached into her backpack and pulled out a business card. She handed it to Officer Morales. It was heavy cardstock embossed with gold lettering, Maya Brooks, founder and CEO, Aurora Global Industries. Officer Morales stared at the card. The name was vaguely familiar. He had seen it in financial news, maybe, business magazines, at the dentist's office. "Aurora Global," he said slowly. "Shipping and logistics," Maya said. "Based in Manhattan. $43 billion in annual revenue." The number hung in the air like a slap. Richard snatched the card from Officer Morales' hand. "Anyone can print business cards." This proves nothing, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Sophia Lopez was already Googling on her phone. "Aurora Global Industries," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Founded 2019. Headquarters in Manhattan. CEO Maya Brooks. Age 28, estimated net worth $43 billion. She held up her phone to show Forbes magazine's 40 Under 40 list. Maya's photo was at the top. The cabin erupted in murmurs. Passengers craned their necks to see the phone screen. Maria Vasquez's live-stream viewer count spiked as she pointed her camera at Sophia's phone. "Holy shit," Maria whispered, then caught herself. "Sorry, family audience, but this is Maya Brooks, the Maya Brooks. She's like the youngest black female billionaire in history." Richard grabbed the phone from Sophia. He stared at the Forbes article. The professional headshot of Maya in a tailored business suit. The headline, "The Shipping Prodigy Who Revolutionized Global Logistics." His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, recognition, horror. Victoria looked over his shoulder at the phone screen. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the color draining from her face. Officer Morales took back Maya's business card and read it again. Aurora Global Industries. He had heard of them. Big government contracts, major corporate partnerships. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I apologize for any misunderstanding. Your documents are clearly in order. You have every right to your seat." Maya nodded. "Thank you." Richard still held Sophia's phone, staring at the Forbes article like it was written in a foreign language. This has to be fake. You can Photoshop anything these days." Dr. Patterson had had enough. He stood up again, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being listened to. "Mr. Hartwell, you need to stop. Right now. You have embarrassed yourself. You've embarrassed this airline, and you've subjected this young woman to treatment that no human being should have to endure. But she doesn't look—" Richard's voice trailed off as he realized what he was about to say. "Doesn't look like what Dr. Patterson pressed. Doesn't look rich enough, doesn't look like your idea of a billionaire, or doesn't look white enough." The question hung in the air like smoke. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Maya stood up slowly. She looked at Richard, then at Victoria, then at Officer Morales. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. "I want everyone to remember this moment," she said. "Remember what happened here. Remember the assumptions that were made. Remember the things that were said." She picked up her phone and made another call. "David, yes, I need the board on an emergency conference call. Now. And David, activate the Pinnacle acquisition. Full acceleration. I want controlling interest by market close." She hung up and looked directly at Richard Hartwell. "Some mistakes can't be undone, Mr. Hartwell. This is one of them." Richard's laugh was nervous now, uncertain. "What are you talking about? You can't just buy an airline because someone hurt your feelings." Maya tilted her head slightly. "Actually, Mr. Hartwell, that's exactly what I can do." The words settled over the cabin like a forecast of storm clouds. Passengers exchanged glances. Maria Vasquez whispered excitedly into her camera about insider trading and corporate acquisitions. But none of them truly understood what they had just witnessed. None of them realized they were watching the opening moves in the most expensive lesson about respect ever taught in the history of commercial aviation. Richard Hartwell had picked a fight with the wrong woman, and Maya Brooks was about to show him exactly what that meant. Victoria looked back and forth between Maya and Richard like a tennis spectator watching a match she couldn't follow. The math that had seemed so simple 5 minutes ago was getting very complicated very quickly. Perhaps she said in a shaky voice, "We could all just take our seats and discuss this calmly." Maya looked at her with the expression of someone who had moved far beyond discussion. "The time for calm discussion," she said quietly, "ended when you called security on a paying passenger for the crime of existing while black." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Around the cabin, passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked away. But everyone kept recording, because they all sensed that something historic was happening in Seat 1A of Pinnacle Airways Flight 847. Something that would be talked about for years to come. Something that would change everything. Captain Rodriguez returned to the cockpit hoping the passenger dispute would resolve itself. In 20 years of flying, he had learned that most conflicts faded once security arrived and common sense prevailed. This time was different. The passenger in 1A wasn't drunk, wasn't belligerent, wasn't causing a scene. She was sitting quietly in her assigned seat with valid documentation. The white businessman was the one creating chaos, but he was also the one with elite status and a history with the airline. Captain Rodriguez had seen this scenario before. The solution was usually the same: move the minority passenger to another seat, offer them compensation, and keep the valuable customer happy. It was the path of least resistance. It was also about to become the most expensive decision in Pinnacle Airways history. Back in the cabin, Maya's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen. "David Rivera. Emergency." "Excuse me," she said to Officer Morales and answered the call on speaker. "Maya, I've got the Aurora Global Board on conference. They're ready for the emergency acquisition vote. Should I proceed?" Maya looked around the cabin. At Richard Hartwell, who was still studying Sophia's phone like it might suddenly prove her identity was fake. At Victoria Martinez, whose hands were shaking as she pretended to check other passengers' seat assignments. At Officer Morales, who looked like he wanted to disappear. "Proceed," she said clearly. David's voice came through the phone speaker. "This is David Rivera, Executive Assistant to CEO Maya Brooks. I'm patching in the Aurora Global Board of Directors for an emergency acquisition vote regarding Pinnacle Airways and its parent company Summit Aviation Holdings." Richard's head snapped up. What did he just say? Maya smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. You wanted to know if I could afford this seat, Mr. Hartwell. You're about to find out exactly what I can afford." The phone speaker crackled as voices joined the conference call. Maya held the phone up so everyone could hear. "Maya, this is Margaret from legal," came a crisp female voice. "We've reviewed the Pinnacle acquisition file. We can move to full purchase with board approval. Summit Aviation's market cap is currently $12.4 billion. Recommended action, Maya asked. Hostile takeover. They're vulnerable after last quarter's losses. We can have controlling interest by market close if we move fast." Dr. Patterson leaned forward in his seat. As a successful physician, he understood business, but this was beyond anything he had ever witnessed. A passenger dispute was turning into a corporate acquisition in real time. Sofia Lopez had stopped recording and started frantically taking notes. As a lawyer, she knew she was witnessing something that would end up in business school textbooks. Maria Vasquez's live stream had exploded to 50,000 viewers. Comments poured in faster than she could read them. "No way is this real. She's actually buying the airline." "This is the most expensive seat dispute in history." Richard grabbed Maya's phone. "This is insane. You can't buy an airline because of a seating dispute." Maya looked at him calmly and took her phone back. "Watch me." She spoke into the phone. "This is Maya Brooks. I'm calling for an emergency board vote on the acquisition of Summit Aviation Holdings parent company of Pinnacle Airways." "Do I have a second, Second?" came another voice from the phone. "All in favor?" A chorus of aye responses echoed through the cabin. "Motion carries unanimously. David, execute the acquisition. Full financial package. I want controlling interest before this plane lands in London. Understood. Legal team is already drafting the paperwork." Maya hung up and looked at Richard. "Mr. Hartwell, as of approximately 15 minutes from now, I will own this airline, which means I will own your Diamond Elite status, which means I will own your reservation history, which means I will own every seat on every plane you've ever flown." The color drained from Richard's face. Victoria stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Ma'am, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. I was just trying to resolve a seating conflict." "By calling security on a black woman with a valid ticket," Maya replied. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's discrimination." Officer Morales cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you're really planning to purchase this airline, I should mention that discriminatory treatment of passengers is a federal offense. There could be investigations, regulatory reviews." Maya nodded. "I'm counting on it." She pulled out her phone again and made another call, this time to a different number. "This is Maya Brooks. I need to speak to someone at the FAA about filing a formal discrimination complaint against Pinnacle Airways." "Yes, I'll hold." Richard's expensive suit was starting to show sweat stains. "You can't be serious about this. It's just a seat. We can work this out." "Now you want to work it out," Dr. Patterson observed. "Funny how that happened right after you found out who she is." "I didn't know," Richard protested. "How was I supposed to know?" Sofia Lopez stood up again, her lawyer instincts fully engaged. "That's exactly the point, Mr. Hartwell. You made assumptions based on her appearance, her race, her clothing. You decided she didn't belong before you knew anything about her. Anyone would have done the same thing." Richard's voice was getting higher, more desperate. "Look at her. She's wearing a hoodie. She looks like a college student." Maya laughed. It was a sound without humor. "Mr. Hartwell, I graduated from Stanford Business School when I was 22. I built a $43 billion company by the time I was 28. I have revolutionized global shipping, negotiated with world leaders, and changed how international commerce operates." She stood up, her hoodie hanging loosely around her small frame. "And you think the most important thing about me is what I'm wearing?" The FAA representative came on the line. Maya switched to speakerphone again. "This is Maya Brooks, CEO of Aurora Global Industries. I'm calling to file a formal complaint of racial discrimination against Pinnacle Airways Flight 847. I'm currently on board the aircraft and have multiple witnesses." "Ma'am, can you describe the nature of the discrimination?" Maya looked directly at Richard and Victoria as she spoke. "I was accused of using a stolen credit card, questioned about my ability to afford my seat, threatened with removal by security, and told I don't belong in first class, all while having valid documentation and having committed no violation of any airline policy, and you believed this treatment was based on your race. I believe it was based on the fact that I'm a young black woman who doesn't conform to someone's idea of what wealth looks like. Victoria stepped forward desperately. That's not true. I treat all passengers equally. I was just trying to resolve a seating conflict. The FAA representative's voice came through the speaker. Ma'am, we'll need formal statements from all parties involved and any witnesses. This will trigger a full investigation of the airline's policies and training procedures. Maya smiled. Perfect. My legal team will be in touch. She hung up and looked around the cabin. Every passenger was staring at her. Some with admiration, some with shock, all with the growing realization that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Ladies and gentlemen, Maya announced to the cabin, you are about to see what happens when discrimination meets consequences. Her phone buzzed with another text from David Acquisition moving fast. Summit Aviation Board is panicking, stock price dropping. We'll have majority control within the hour. Maya showed the text to Officer Morales. Officer, you might want to call your supervisor. In about an hour, I'm going to be your boss's boss's boss. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We're experiencing some operational issues. We'll have an update shortly. Richard Hartwell sat down heavily in an empty seat across the aisle. The reality of what was happening was starting to sink in. He had picked a fight with someone who could buy and sell him without checking her bank balance. This is insane, he muttered. This is absolutely insane. Maya sat back down in seat 1A and buckled her seatbelt. Mr. Hartwell, you said people like me don't belong in first class. You were wrong. People like you don't belong anywhere near my airline. The cabin fell silent except for the hum of the engines and the sound of Maria Vasquez whispering excitedly into her phone, Guys, I think I just live-streamed the most expensive temper tantrum in corporate history. Outside, the sun was setting over JFK Airport, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Inside Pinnacle Airways Flight 847, the most expensive lesson in respect in aviation history was just getting started. Maya Brooks had been underestimated for the last time, and Richard Hartwell was about to learn exactly what that meant. Victoria Martinez looked around the cabin, desperately searching for an exit from the nightmare she had created. Her supervisor had trained her to prioritize elite passengers to smooth over conflicts to make problems disappear. She had never been trained for what to do when the problem owned the airline. Officer Morales received a call on his radio. He stepped into the galley to take it privately, but his voice carried back to the cabin. Yes, sir. No, sir. I understand. Yes, I'm aware of who she is now. No, there's been no violation of law on her part. Yes, sir. I'll wait for further instructions. He returned to the cabin looking like a man who had just received very bad news. Maya watched him approach. Let me guess. Your supervisors are very interested in this situation now. Ma'am, airport police are requesting that all parties remain available for questioning. This incident is being elevated to federal jurisdiction. Richard's head shot up. Federal jurisdiction for what civil rights violation? Sofia Lopez answered. When discrimination happens on an airplane, it becomes a federal matter. I didn't discriminate against anyone, Richard protested. I just wanted my seat. Dr. Patterson shook his head. Mr. Hartwell, do you even hear yourself? You accused her of theft, questioned her finances, and said she doesn't belong here all based on how she looks. But she's wearing a hoodie. The absurdity of using clothing as a justification for discrimination hung in the air. Around the cabin, passengers began to laugh. Not with Richard, but at him. Maya's phone rang again. She answered on speaker. Maya, this is Margaret again. Legal update. Summit Aviation's board just called an emergency meeting. They're trying to organize a defense against the takeover. Too late, Maya said. How's our position? We've acquired 28% in the last 30 minutes. Stock price is in freefall. Their major investors are calling for information. Media is picking up the story. Media CNN just called. Something about a live stream of a passenger dispute that's gone viral. They want a statement. Maya looked at Maria Vasquez, who gave her a guilty smile and a little wave. "No statement yet," Maya said into the phone. "Let them buy the airline first, then we'll talk." She hung up and addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay in your travel. I want you to know that what happened here today will never happen again on any aircraft that I own." Spontaneous applause broke out from several passengers. Dr. Patterson started clapping, followed by Sofia Lopez, then Maria Vasquez, then others throughout the cabin. Richard sat alone, not clapping, staring at his hands. Victoria looked like she was about to cry. And Maya Brooks, the young woman in the hoodie who had been told she didn't belong, sat quietly in seat 1A with the calm expression of someone who had just changed the rules of the game forever. The plane hadn't even taken off yet, but the flight was already over for some people. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom with barely concealed tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're going to have a slight delay while we sort out some administrative issues. We appreciate your patience." In the first-class cabin, the administrative issues had names Richard Hartwell, who was sweating through his expensive suit, and Victoria Martinez, whose career was disintegrating in real time. Maya's phone buzzed with an update from David, 39% ownership achieved. Summit Aviation stock down 22%. Their lawyers are calling our lawyers. Emergency board meeting in 30 minutes. She showed the text to Officer Morales, who had been standing awkwardly in the aisle for the past 10 minutes waiting for instructions that never came. Officer Maya said quietly, "You might want to start documenting everything that's happened here. When the federal investigation begins, you'll want your report to be accurate." "Federal investigation," Victoria's voice cracked. "For what?" Sofia Lopez looked up from her phone where she had been frantically researching federal airline discrimination laws. "Civil rights violations carry serious penalties. Fines, criminal charges, loss of operating licenses, criminal charges." Richard's voice went up an octave. "For a seating dispute for discrimination," Dr. Patterson corrected. "Let's call it what it is." Maya stood up and walked to the galley where she could speak privately. The other passengers watched her every move, sensing that something momentous was building. She dialed a number and waited for an answer. "This is Maya Brooks. I need to speak to Secretary Martinez of the Department of Transportation." "Yes, I know what time it is. Tell him it's about Pinnacle Airways and civil rights enforcement. He'll take the call." While she waited, Victoria approached her desperately. "Miss Brooks, please. I have 2 children. I need this job. I was just following company policy." "What policy?" Maya interrupted. "Show me the written policy that says to call security on black passengers with valid tickets. It's not written down, but we're taught to trust our instincts to watch for suspicious behavior." "What was suspicious about my behavior?" Victoria's mouth opened and closed. She couldn't answer without admitting that Maya's race was the only suspicious thing about her. I thought you seemed. I seemed what, Victoria?" The question hung in the air between them. Around the cabin, passengers leaned in to hear the answer. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "You didn't fit the profile." "What profile?" The typical first-class passenger." Maya's phone connected to the Secretary of Transportation. She put it on speaker. "Secretary Martinez. This is Maya Brooks, CEO of Aurora Global Industries. I'm calling to inform you of a civil rights incident on Pinnacle Airways Flight 847. I'm currently on board the aircraft with multiple witnesses to discriminatory treatment based on racial profiling." The secretary's voice was crisp. "Professional Miss Brooks, I'm familiar with your company's work with the federal government. Can you describe the incident?" Maya looked directly at Victoria as she spoke. "I was accused of credit card fraud, threatened with removal, and told I don't fit the profile of a first-class passenger, all while having valid documentation and violating no policies. And you believe this treatment was racially motivated." "A flight attendant just admitted on speaker that I didn't fit the profile of their typical first-class passenger." Victoria's face went white as she realized her words had been broadcast to the Secretary of Transportation. Miss Brooks, the Department of Transportation takes these allegations very seriously. We'll be launching an immediate investigation into Pinnacle Airways' training procedures and passenger treatment policies. Thank you, Secretary Martinez. My legal team will provide full cooperation. Maya hung up and looked at Victoria, who was now visibly shaking. Victoria, you've just admitted to racial profiling on a recorded call with the Secretary of Transportation. I hope your instincts were worth it. Richard, who had been unusually quiet during the call, suddenly stood up and pointed an accusatory finger at Maya. This is extortion. You're using your wealth to bully people who made an honest mistake. The accusation echoed through the cabin. Several passengers gasped. Maria Vasquez swung her camera towards Richard, catching his red-faced outburst in high definition. Maya turned to face him fully. When she spoke, her voice was deadly calm. Mr. Hartwell, let me make sure I understand. You accused me of theft. You said I don't belong here. You demanded my removal based solely on my appearance. And when I respond to discrimination with legal action, you call it bullying. You're buying an entire airline out of spite. I'm buying an airline to ensure this never happens again. To anyone, ever. Dr. Patterson stood up again, his medical training making him hyper-aware of escalating tensions. Mr. Hartwell, you need to stop talking, right now. Everything you say is being recorded and will be part of the federal investigation. Let him talk, Sofia Lopez interjected. As a lawyer, I can tell you that every word is evidence of his mindset and motivations. Richard's expensive suit was now soaked with perspiration. The reality of his situation was finally penetrating his privilege-induced fog. I didn't mean, he started, then stopped. You didn't mean what Maya pressed. You didn't mean to reveal your racist assumptions. You didn't mean to show everyone exactly what kind of person you are. Maya's phone buzzed with another update. She read it aloud. 47% ownership achieved. Summit Aviation has called an emergency press conference. Their stock is in freefall. She looked around the cabin at the assembled passengers, all of whom were still recording, still witnessing, still participating in what would become aviation history. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're watching is the consequence of assuming that wealth has a color, that belonging has an appearance, that respect is earned by fitting someone's narrow idea of what success looks like. She sat back down in seat 1A and buckled her seatbelt. Mr. Hartwell wanted to know if I belong in this seat. Victoria wanted to know if I fit their profile. Officer Morales wanted to know if my documents are legitimate. She pulled her hoodie up over her head, a gesture that had started this entire confrontation. Here's what they didn't ask. Did I pay for my seat? Yes. Did I follow all airline policies? Yes. Did I treat anyone with disrespect? No. Did I do anything wrong? No. Her phone rang again. David's voice filled the cabin through the speaker. Maya, we've crossed 50% ownership. Summit Aviation is officially under Aurora Global Control. Legal is drafting the new corporate structure. Congratulations, you now own Pinnacle Airways. The cabin erupted in gasps and murmurs. Even the passengers who had been following the acquisition in real time seemed stunned by the finality of it. Maya looked at Richard Hartwell, whose face had gone from red to ash gray. Mr. Hartwell, you wanted to know who belongs in first class on this airline. Now you know I do, because it's my airline. She looked at Victoria Martinez, who was gripping the galley counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Victoria, you wanted to know if I fit your profile. Your profile no longer matters, because it's my airline. She looked at Officer Morales, who was frantically writing notes in his incident report. Officer, you wanted to verify my credentials. Here are my credentials. I just bought this airline while sitting in the seat they said I didn't belong in. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom again, but this time it was different. Careful, respectful. Miss Brooks, this is Captain Rodriguez. I understand you're the new owner of Pinnacle Airways. What are your instructions regarding this flight? Maya picked up the cabin phone and spoke directly to the cockpit. Captain, we're going to finish this flight. We're going to London. and when we arrive, there are going to be some changes." She hung up and addressed the cabin one final time before the chaos that would follow. What happened here today wasn't about a seat. It was about dignity. It was about respect. It was about the assumption that some people belong and others don't. Her voice carried throughout the cabin, steady and sure. Those assumptions just cost someone their airline. Outside, the aircraft emergency vehicles were gathering. Not because of any mechanical problem, but because word had leaked that the most expensive passenger dispute in aviation history was playing out in real time on social media. Inside the cabin, Richard Hartwell sat with his head in his hands, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had triggered. Victoria Martinez stood frozen in the galley, her career ending not with a retirement party but with a federal investigation. And Maya Brooks, the young black woman who had been told she didn't belong, sat quietly in seat 1A of the airline she now owned, wearing the same hoodie that had started it all. The plane still hadn't taken off, but for some people the journey was already over. David Rivera's voice filled the cabin through Maya's speakerphone, carrying news that would reshape the aviation industry. "Maya, it's official. Aurora Global now owns 52% of Summit Aviation Holdings. Pinnacle Airways is yours." The words settled over the first-class cabin like a thunderclap. Even passengers who had been following the acquisition in real time seemed stunned by the finality of it. Richard Hartwell looked up from his hands, his face the color of ash. 52% you bought a controlling interest in an airline because of a seating dispute. Maya tilted her head slightly. "No, Mr. Hartwell, I bought controlling interest because you, Miss Martinez, and your airline demonstrated a pattern of discrimination that needed to be stopped permanently." Officer Morales had been taking notes throughout the confrontation, but now he stopped writing and stared at Maya. "Ma'am, just to be clear, you now own this airline, I do. Which means technically you're everyone's boss, I am. The simplicity of the exchange made it somehow more powerful. No corporate jargon, no legal complexity, just a young black woman in a hoodie who now controlled a $12 billion aviation company." Victoria's voice came out as a croak. "What? What happens now?" Maya stood up and walked to the galley where Victoria was gripping the counter. When she spoke, her voice was calm but carried absolute authority. "Now, Victoria, you face the consequences of your choices. You called security on a black passenger with valid documentation. You sided with someone who was openly discriminatory. You admitted to racial profiling on a recorded call with the Secretary of Transportation. I was just doing my job." "No," Dr. Patterson interjected from his seat. "You were just doing what you thought would make the wealthy white man happy." Maya nodded. "Dr. Patterson is correct, and that's exactly the problem we're going to fix." Her phone buzzed with another call. She answered on speaker. "Maya, this is Margaret from Legal. We've got reporters at JFK, LAX, and Heathrow asking for statements. CNN wants an exclusive. The Wall Street Journal is calling this the most expensive discrimination lawsuit in corporate history. It's not a lawsuit, Maya corrected. It's an acquisition, which somehow makes it worse for them. Summit Aviation's board is requesting an emergency meeting with you. Tell them I'm busy. I'll call them from London." She hung up and looked around the cabin. 24 passengers, all recording, all witnessing, all about to become part of business school case studies on the cost of discrimination. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya announced, "what you're seeing is what happens when bias meets consequences. When assumptions meet reality. When discrimination meets someone who has the power to stop it." Maria Vasquez raised her hand like she was in school. "Miss Brooks, can I ask what's going to happen to Mr. Hartwell?" Maya looked at Richard, who was staring at his phone with the expression of someone watching his world collapse in real time. His Google search results showed his own name trending on Twitter along with video clips of his most discriminatory statements. "Mr. Hartwell made his choices," Maya said. "The consequences are his to live with." But what specifically, Maria pressed her live stream audience, demanding details. Maya pulled out her phone and made another call, this one to airport police. "This is Maya Brooks. I'm calling to file formal charges of assault and harassment against Richard Hartwell, passenger on Pinnacle Airways Flight 847. Yes, I'm the new owner of the airline. Yes, we have video evidence and multiple witnesses. Richard's head snapped up. Assault. I never touched you. You grabbed my phone, Mr. Hartwell. That's assault. You also engaged in harassment based on race, in federal jurisdiction, on an aircraft. The color drained from Richard's face as he realized the legal implications. Federal charges, criminal record, prison time. This is insane, he shouted, standing up so fast his seat rocked. You can't destroy someone's life over a misunderstanding. Sophia Lopez looked up from her phone where she had been researching federal airline crime statutes. Actually, Mr. Hartwell, federal assault charges on an aircraft carry up to 20 years in prison. Hate crime enhancements could double that. Hate crime, Richard's voice cracked. I'm not a racist. The absurdity of the claim, given everything he had said and done, hung in the air. Several passengers laughed outright. Dr. Patterson stood up again, his medical training making him concerned about Richard's increasingly erratic behavior. Mr. Hartwell, I strongly advise you to remain seated and stop talking until you have legal representation. I don't need a lawyer. I didn't do anything wrong. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from David Airport Police boarding now. Federal agents en route. Media circus outside. Your mother called. She saw the news. Maya smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. Her mother always did have perfect timing. The cabin door opened and 2 airport police officers entered, followed by a woman in a business suit who introduced herself as Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Miss Brooks, I'm Agent Collins. We understand you filed federal charges related to civil rights violations. I have. This is Mr. Richard Hartwell. Maya pointed to Richard, who looked like he was about to pass out. He's accused me of theft, demanded my removal based on race, and committed assault. We have video evidence and multiple witnesses. Agent Collins looked around the cabin, noting the phones still recording the passengers, still watching the flight crew, still frozen in shock. Mr. Hartwell, you're under arrest for federal assault and civil rights violations. You have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda warning filled the cabin, Richard's legs gave out and he collapsed back into his seat. The expensive suit, the platinum watch, the entitled attitude, none of it mattered now. This isn't happening, he mumbled. This can't be happening. But it was happening, and every second was being broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of viewers who were watching the most expensive lesson in respect ever taught. Officer Morales approached Maya as the federal agents finished with Richard. Ma'am, there will be paperwork statements, court dates. My legal team will handle it, Maya replied. This needs to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And what about the flight attendant? Maya looked at Victoria, who had been standing in the galley like a statue, watching her career end in real time. Victoria's employment with this airline is terminated immediately. HR will contact her about the final paperwork and the federal investigation. Victoria's legs buckled. She grabbed the galley counter to keep from falling. Please, she whispered, I have children. I need this job. Maya's expression didn't change. You should have thought about that before you decided to racially profile your passengers. Agent Collins finished with Richard and turned to Maya. Miss Brooks, we'll need a formal statement, but given the unusual circumstances of this case, we can arrange for that at your convenience. Unusual circumstances. Well, it's not every day that a victim of discrimination responds by buying the airline. Maya smiled. Agent Collins, you haven't seen anything yet. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom. Miss Brooks, we have clearance for departure when you're ready. What are your instructions? Maya picked up the cabin phone. Captain, we're going to London. But first I want you to make an announcement to the entire aircraft about the new ownership structure and zero-tolerance policies. Yes, ma'am. The captain's voice filled the entire plane, reaching back to economy class where passengers had been trying to figure out why their flight was delayed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I have an important announcement regarding Pinnacle Airways. As of today, our airline has been acquired by Aurora Global Industries. The new owner is on board this aircraft and has implemented immediate changes to our passenger treatment policies, effective immediately. Pinnacle Airways has zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind. Any employee found engaging in discriminatory behavior will be terminated. Any passenger found harassing others will be banned for life and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. In economy class, passengers looked at each other in confusion and excitement. Someone had live-streamed enough of the first-class drama for word to spread, but most of the plane was just learning that their airline had been bought mid-flight. Back in first class, federal agents were escorting Richard Hartwell off the plane in handcuffs. As he passed Maya's seat, he stopped and looked at her with a mixture of hatred and desperation. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "People like you always go too far." Maya met his gaze calmly. "Mr. Hartwell, people like me built the country you're about to be prosecuted in. People like me created the laws you're about to face. People like me are done being told we don't belong." Richard was led away, his expensive shoes echoing against the jet bridge as he was taken into federal custody. Victoria was escorted off next her flight attendant uniform, a reminder of the career she had just destroyed. She didn't look back. As the cabin door closed behind them, the remaining passengers sat in stunned silence. They had witnessed something that would be talked about for decades, something that would change how airlines treated passengers forever. Maya sat back down in seat 1A and buckled her seatbelt. She pulled out her phone and called her mother. "Hi, Mom. Yes, I saw the news too. No, I'm fine. Yes, I'll still make it for dinner. It's a long story, but basically someone told me I didn't belong somewhere, so I bought it." "What?" "Oh, the airline. I bought the airline." "Mom, I have to go. We're about to take off." "I love you too." She hung up and looked around the cabin at the passengers who had witnessed history. "Thank you all for your support today. Your willingness to speak up, to record what happened, to stand for what's right. That's what made the difference." Dr. Patterson raised his hand. "Miss Brooks, what happens now? I mean, beyond the legal consequences." Maya smiled. "Now, Dr. Patterson, we change everything." The engines spun up for takeoff, but Maya Brooks was already thinking about landing, about the changes she would implement, about the industry she would transform, about the message she would send to every airline executive, every employee, every passenger in the world. Discrimination just got expensive, and Maya Brooks was just getting started. 6 hours later, as Pinnacle Airways Flight 847 descended through the cloudy skies over London Heathrow, Maya Brooks was no longer just a passenger. She was the owner of an airline, the face of corporate accountability, and the author of the most expensive discrimination case in business history. Her phone had been buzzing constantly during the flight. Text messages from world leaders, interview requests from major media outlets, congratulations from fellow CEOs, and legal updates from her team in New York. David's latest message was the most important Pinnacle Airways board meeting scheduled for tomorrow. They're requesting immediate policy changes. Stock price recovering after your statement. New hiring standards ready for implementation. Maya had spent the flight drafting the new corporate structure for Pinnacle Airways. Gone would be the old culture of deferring to wealthy passengers regardless of their behavior. Gone would be the unwritten rules about who belonged in first class. Gone would be the assumption that discrimination was just the cost of doing business. Dr. Patterson, who had spent the flight reading legal documents on his tablet, looked up as the plane began its final descent. "Miss Brooks, I've been researching the legal precedents for what happened today. There's nothing like it in aviation law. You've essentially created a new category of corporate accountability." Sophia Lopez nodded from across the aisle. "The civil rights implications are enormous. You've shown that discrimination has financial consequences that go beyond lawsuits and settlements." Maria Vasquez, who had been live-streaming updates throughout the flight, turned her camera toward Maya. "Miss Brooks, my viewers want to know what changes you're planning for Pinnacle Airways." Maya looked directly into the camera. "Every airline employee will undergo comprehensive bias training. Not just once, but quarterly. We're implementing AI monitoring networks to track passenger treatment patterns. Any employee found discriminating will be terminated immediately. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But more importantly, we're changing the culture. We're hiring for empathy, not just efficiency. We're promoting based on how you treat people, not just how much money you bring in. We're making respect non-negotiable. The plane touched down at Heathrow with barely a bump. As they taxied to the gate, Captain Rodriguez's voice filled the cabin one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London Heathrow. On behalf of the new management of Pinnacle Airways, I want to thank you for flying with us today. You have been part of a historic flight that will change aviation forever. As passengers began gathering their belongings, Maya received a final call from David. Maya, CNN is waiting at the gate. BBC wants an exclusive. The Prime Minister's office called, and your mother says dinner is at 8 sharp, airline or no airline. Maya laughed. Tell them I'll have a statement tomorrow. Tonight is about family. She stood up and walked through the cabin, personally thanking each passenger who had supported her during the confrontation. To Dr. Patterson, she offered a position on Pinnacle's new passenger advocacy board. To Sofia Lopez, she extended an opportunity to head the airline's Civil Rights Compliance Department. To Maria Vasquez, she proposed a partnership to document the changes at Pinnacle Airways. All accepted. As Maya walked off the plane, she was greeted by a crowd of reporters, cameras, and microphones. But she wasn't the same woman who had boarded in New York. She was no longer just the victim of discrimination. She was the architect of change. Miss Brooks shouted at a BBC reporter, "You've spent $12 billion on what started as a seating dispute. Do you think it was worth it?" Maya paused at the top of the jet bridge and looked back at the plane that had carried her into history. It wasn't $12 billion for a seat, she said clearly. It was $12 billion for dignity, for respect, for the principle that no one should be judged by their appearance rather than their character. What's next for Pinnacle Airways, called out a CNN correspondent. What's next is that we become the airline that other airlines aspire to be, where every passenger is treated with dignity regardless of their race, their clothing, or their bank account. Where bias training isn't just a checkbox, it's a commitment. And Richard Hartwell. Any comment on his arrest, Maya's expression grew serious. Mr. Hartwell's actions today had consequences. Those consequences were determined by the legal process, not by me. But I hope his experience serves as a lesson to anyone who thinks discrimination is acceptable. The reporters shouted more questions, but Maya was done talking. She had a birthday dinner to attend. 3 months later, the transformation was complete. Pinnacle Airways had become the most sought-after employer in the aviation industry. Their passenger satisfaction scores were the highest in the world. Their stock price had reached record levels. Richard Hartwell had pleaded guilty to federal assault and civil rights violations. He received 3 years in federal prison, 5 years of probation, and a lifetime ban from all Aurora Global properties. His hedge fund had collapsed, his social connections had evaporated, and his name had become synonymous with the cost of discrimination. Victoria Martinez had been blacklisted from the aviation industry. After months of unemployment, she had found work as a customer service representative for a car rental company where her interactions were recorded for quality assurance. But the real change was cultural. Airlines across the world began implementing Maya's protocols, comprehensive anti-discrimination policies named after the woman who had shown that bias could bankrupt a company in real time. Flight attendants were trained to recognize unconscious bias. Gate agents learned to treat all passengers equally regardless of appearance. Executives understood that discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was financially catastrophic. The video of Maya's confrontation became the most watched airline incident in Internet history. Business schools taught case studies about the Pinnacle transformation. The phrase "pulling a Maya Brooks" entered a common usage, meaning to respond to discrimination with overwhelming force. Maya herself had become reluctant spokesperson for corporate accountability. She testified before Congress about bias in transportation. She spoke at the United Nations about workplace discrimination. She established the Aurora Foundation, funding civil rights organizations and bias prevention research. But perhaps most importantly, she had kept her promise to her mother. They had dinner together every week, whether Maya was in New York, London, Singapore, or anywhere else in the world. Because some things mattered more than business empires. Some things mattered more than proving a point. Some things mattered more than changing the world. Family dinner was one of them. The airline industry would never be the same. Passengers around the world flew with more confidence, knowing that discrimination now came with consequences that companies couldn't afford. And Maya Brooks, the young woman who had been told she didn't belong in first class, had ensured that no one would ever be told that again. At least, not on her airline. 1 year after Flight 847 made history, Maya Brooks stood in the boardroom of Aurora Global Industries looking out at the Manhattan skyline. The same skyline she had dreamed of conquering when she was 23 and sleeping in a rental car after being denied a hotel room. The transformation of Pinnacle Airways was complete, but it was bigger than one airline. The Maya Brooks effect had rippled through every industry where customer service met discrimination. Hotels implemented bias monitoring networks. Restaurants trained staff on inclusive service. Retail chains overhauled their security protocols. Maya's assistant, David Rivera, knocked on the door and entered with that morning's reports. "The quarterly numbers are in," he said, setting down a tablet. "Pinnacle Airways posted the highest profit margins in company history. Customer satisfaction is up 43%. Employee retention is at 96%. Maya smiled, but didn't turn from the window. And the legal settlements, Richard Hartwell's civil lawsuit, was dismissed. The judge said his own actions on that flight constituted assumption of risk for any consequences that followed. Maya finally turned around. "How's he doing?" Last report had him working at a logistics warehouse in Newark. Ironically, it's owned by one of our subsidiaries. He processes packages with Aurora Global logos 40 hours a week. The cosmic justice of Richard Hartwell handling Maya's company's merchandise wasn't lost on either of them, but Maya didn't take pleasure in his fall. She had learned that revenge was less satisfying than reform. And Victoria Martinez still in customer service for the rental car company. She's actually become an advocate for bias training in her new workplace. Apparently, the experience changed her perspective. Maya nodded. Change was possible for everyone, even people who had made terrible choices. Her phone buzzed with a text message that made her smile. "Don't forget dinner tonight. Your favorite restaurant. 8 p.m. sharp. Love, Mom." Some things never changed, and Maya was grateful for that. The knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Sophia Lopez entered wearing a sharp business suit and carrying the confidence that came from being the most successful civil rights compliance director in corporate America. "Maya, I have the final numbers from our first year of the Aurora Inclusion Initiative." Maya gestured to the conference table and they sat down together. 237 companies have adopted our bias monitoring protocols, Sophia reported. Discrimination complaints in the aviation industry are down 68%. Customer satisfaction across all participating companies is up an average of 34%. Financial impact companies that implemented our protocols saw stock price increases averaging 12%. Companies that ignored them, well, 3 went out of business after discrimination scandals. Maya leaned back in her chair. The business case for treating people with dignity. Exactly. You proved that discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's financially stupid. Dr. Patterson appeared in the doorway, having been invited to join Aurora Global's board of directors after his principled stand on Flight 847. "Maya, I just got off a call with the Surgeon General. She wants you to keynote the National Conference on Healthcare Equity. Apparently, what you did to aviation, she wants you to do to medicine." Maya shook her head with a smile. "I bought one airline and suddenly I'm supposed to fix every industry." "You didn't just buy an airline doctor," Patterson said, sitting down at the table. "You proved that individual action could create industry change. That's powerful medicine." Through the window, Maya could see JFK Airport in the distance. Somewhere out there, Flight 847's route was being flown again, probably at that very moment, with passengers who would never experience what she had experienced because of what happened that day. Her phone rang. Maria Vasquez, who had become Maya's documentary filmmaker capturing the ongoing transformation at Pinnacle Airways. Maya. I just finished editing the final segment of The Flight That Changed Everything. Netflix wants to buy it for $25 million. All proceeds go to the Aurora Foundation just like you wanted. Maya smiled. Send the contracts to legal. And Maria, thank you for recording that day, for speaking up, for making sure the world saw what really happened. Thank you for showing us what courage looks like. After hanging up, Maya sat quietly for a moment, thinking about the journey from that worn seat in first class to this boardroom overlooking the world she had changed. Her mother's text reminded her that some victories were bigger than others. Arriving on time for family dinner would always matter more than quarterly profit reports. But as she gathered her things to leave for the day, Maya allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Not for what she had accomplished, but for what she had made possible. Somewhere, a young black woman was boarding a plane without fear that her appearance would be questioned. Somewhere, a Hispanic family was checking into a hotel without worry that their reservation would be lost. Somewhere, a person who didn't fit someone's narrow definition of belonging was being treated with dignity. Maya had learned that power wasn't about what you could buy. It was about what you could change. She had bought an airline to make a point about respect. The point had been made. The change was permanent. And somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, another Pinnacle Airways flight was carrying passengers who would never know how different their experience might have been if not for a young woman in a hoodie who refused to give up her seat. Maya Brooks had kept her promise to herself made in a rental car parking lot 5 years earlier. No one would ever make her feel like she didn't belong again. And more importantly, no one would make anyone else feel that way either. At least, not without consequences. As she walked out of Aurora Global Headquarters towards dinner with her mother, Maya passed the lobby display that had become famous around the world. It was a simple placard with a simple message. Dignity is not an upgrade. It's standard. The same words she had spoken to Congress, to the United Nations, to business leaders around the world. The same words that had become the motto of an industry-wide transformation. The same words that meant no passenger would ever again be told that they didn't belong in the seat they paid for. Maya smiled as she walked into the New York evening, headed for dinner with the woman who had taught her that respect wasn't something you earned based on your appearance or your bank account. It was something every human being deserved simply by virtue of being human. That lesson had cost an airline $12 billion to learn. But, as Maya had told the reporters that day at Heathrow, it wasn't $12 billion for a seat. It was $12 billion for dignity, and dignity, Maya had proven, was priceless. The story of Maya Brooks and Flight 847 became legend in business schools of civil rights organizations and aviation academies around the world. It proved that discrimination wasn't just a moral failure. It was a business catastrophe waiting to happen. And it showed that sometimes the most powerful response to being told you don't belong is to buy the place and change the rules for everyone. Today, when passengers board any flight, stay in any hotel, or enter any business where they're treated with dignity, regardless of their appearance, they're benefiting from the legacy of a young woman who refused to give up her seat and ended up changing an entire industry. Because Maya Brooks understood something that Richard Hartwell never learned. Respect isn't about what you're wearing or what you look like. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone you meet. And when that lesson costs $12 billion to teach, it tends to be remembered. This story isn't just about one woman's fight for her seat. It's about the fight for dignity that belongs to all of us. Have you ever been judged unfairly because of how you look? Have you ever stood up for someone who was being treated poorly? Share your story in the comments below, because every voice matters in the fight for equality. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how we treat each other, then smash that like button. Your like helps spread this message to more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about courage, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. And please share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that they belong no matter what anyone else says. Together, we can make sure that Maya Brooks' legacy lives on one story at a time, one person at a time, one act of dignity at a time. Because when we stand up for respect, we're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for everyone who comes after us. Thank you for watching, and remember, you belong wherever you have the courage to claim your seat.